Okay, we're back along the Croatian Adriatic Coast, and I know that's a mouthful. With our next stop being Sibenik, we are now comfortably in the Dalmatian coast, but the second we call this series the Dalmatian coast, it'll just be ringing a dinner bell for a small militia of pedants to jump in the comments like, your first episode in Pula was in Istria, which is not part of the Dalmatian coast. We would like to invite you to correct this factual inaccuracy at the earliest possible opportunity. What do you mean I'm creating a straw man? Would I? I'm quite sure my life and blood vessels would be a lot better if I were just able to adopt a zen detachment from all the bad faith criticisms, whataboutisms, and that most dependable of crowds, the "you didn't slather this location with nothing but unceasing praise, therefore I must infer that you are harbouring a deep hatred for my favourite holiday spot" lobby. I swear half of these scripts are spent getting ahead of nitpickers and a puzzling subsection of human beings who don't seem to understand that you can love something and also be honest about it. Yes, you and me both. Anyway, on with the episode. And hey, maybe write something nice below and help us out. I don't know. So after Zadar, the next city along our Dalmatian coast journey is this. The accent above the S means that you've sort of got to pronounce it Sibenik, though I'm sure there's some nuance of pronunciation I'm completely missing there. Sibenik is a pretty major town along the Dalmatian coast, but it is nowhere near as well known as some of the others on this list. It's probably the largest coastal town in this stretch that doesn't get its own airport. I've got to say straight off, the street layout is hilarious. And by hilarious, I mean so labyrinthine we had to fight a minotaur every time we walked back to our apartment. Our Airbnb host, having ample experience of this, had been kind enough to send her son to pick us up from the bus station. Now, we'd encountered something like this in Dubrovnik, but usually in the UK, if you see a fairly solid set of concrete stairs, you perhaps subconsciously infer, well, okay, those might have taken a lot of effort, and this is sort of effort that local government would have to put in, therefore this is a public path, therefore it must go somewhere. No. Despite how beautiful it is, the street layout of Sibenik is a cruel mistress and feels no remorse whatsoever about leading you on a tangle of steep uphill streets and alleys only to dump you at a dead end, whilst also in sight of your destination but with no way to access it without some pretty enthusiastic parkour. A little way above our accommodation is one of the town's Venetian forts, and there are even signs luring travellers into the heart of the labyrinth. Our host had countless examples of strangers climbing the actual stairs all the way up to her front door, still thinking they were on the way to the fort. Anyway, I'm not going to complain about it because the reward for our hill climbs was this view. Yeah, man, I could just spend all day looking at this. This was the balcony of our Airbnb. I was so pleased with this one. Let's talk about what we're looking at here. The old town of Sibenik is pretty much in front of you there, and it's not too vast. Look to the left and the high rises of the modern town are visible. Sibenik is pretty squished between the mountains and the sea, hence the town isn't very deep east to west. It's kind of stretched itself along the coast north to south. It's a historically significant spot, being located in the strategic position facing this, the St. Anthony Channel, which is a narrow entrance to the bay from the Adriatic. And since this is the most easily defensible entrance to a large inland waterway fed by the Krka River, it's an attractive place for a port. All through the town, you can see flashes of medieval Gothic, which was a bit different to what we'd seen in previous Croatian towns. We were taking a stroll through the old town, but we weren't stopping just yet, as we had a boat to catch. So at the mouth of the Anthony Channel is the Venetian coastal fort of St. Nicholas. It's not accessible by land, and while you could take a boat or a kayak to get a look at it from the outside, the only way you're allowed to land is if you're on one of the official tours. Now, these are not all that expensive, and they leave several times a day. It was nice to get out on a boat and get a wide-angle view of the town, the karst cliffs providing a spectacular view off to either side of the channel. The fort itself was well worth seeing. It's another part of the UNESCO inscription we mentioned in Zadar of the Venetian defensive works. It's not one of the most elaborate historic sites ever. At a brisk walk, you could cover the whole place in about 15 minutes. But as I ended up hanging back from the rest of the group to get footage of the space, it took on an almost cathedral-like atmosphere with the high arch of the ceilings and the deep silence with the sunlight bouncing off the waves and penetrating the cannon ports to bounce off the walls. It's one of the main attractions in Sibenik and, yeah, well worth seeing. Boat back, and since it was about 36 degrees that day, we pretty much hid in the shade. And oh look, I'm doing my brand ambassador thing again. Still not convinced it's all that spectacular, but you're sitting by the water in the glorious Croatian summer sunshine, and the droplets hints of condensation dripping seductively down the glass. Look, I'm only human. You'll have no trouble feeding yourself here. You don't need restaurant tips from us. You can eat on pretty much any budget. As it was, we took another casual wander through the old town and then drifted back to our apartment around sunset. Not without a couple of wrong turns and retraced steps. It was a bit of an early night, but the heat of the day had mostly taken it out of us, and we'd still only been in the country 36 hours, so we were pretty bushed. The views of the sun setting behind St Michael's Fortress were just unreal. Anyway, made up for the slightly early night with a 6 a.m. start. The sun was just creeping over the ridgeline behind us. My first targets were the fortresses at the top of the hills. So you need to take this staircase, which is about 100 steps or so, then discover... No, it's just someone's house. And the perpetual snakes and ladders game that is the Sibenik street layout just sends you right back to the 12th square, just cause. If you manage to find yourself to this sloping road, then you've basically cracked it. So first, this is the Barone Fortress, which is actually pretty close to our apartment. There's just no through route. It's a Venetian fort that defends... Wait, I thought this was the Venetian fortress. Yeah, this is another one. But hang on, okay, so who built the one from sunset last night then? Yeah, that would also be the Venetians. So there's 3 Venetian forts here? No, that would be ridiculous. You've forgotten about St John's on the Hill, 300 metres away. There's 4. Barone has been restored, and St John's down the road was a building site when we were there, so by the time you see this or visit, it might be restored as well. The inside of Barone is pretty small. I mean, there's not so much you get from the inside that you wouldn't appreciate from the outside, but, you know, they've done well with the info boards, and the coffee place even has its own branded espresso cups, which is an impressive attention to detail. The real star of the show, in either case, is the view over the town. There's also something I'd grown to adore about being in Croatia. It's a cocktail of the early morning sunshine gently warming up the pine needles and releasing this intoxicating aroma with the cicadas chirping. It just makes me so happy to be there. So, headed down to the old town. I was on the clock a little bit, so I didn't have as much time as I would have liked to explore. Quick espresso. The reason we were in a hurry was we had a 9 o'clock bus to catch to the Krka waterfalls. Except the 9 o'clock bus that was scheduled apparently doesn't exist, or it may once have existed, or indeed may exist in the future, but for us we had to wait till 11:15. So that was a bit of an anticlimax. Took a bit more of a wander through the old town. We hadn't really had time for a proper breakfast, so we were on the hunt for a bakery, and we encountered this place. Okay, this is an unreasonably amazing bakery. I don't credit myself with any sort of expertise, but I am a gent who eats a lot of pastries. Guess it kind of goes with the coffee drinking territory. Now, your average Croat pastry or pain au chocolat or croissant is fine, but they all have this similar thing going on. I don't know if it's like the oil they use or if they're using... I don't know. They're not the greatest. I'll eat one, but it's not as nice as your average. But these croissants were ridiculous. They do a bunch of different fillings. There's caramel, chocolate, pistachio, but the pastry itself is outstanding. And I would not hand out this accolade readily, but this was one of the best croissants I have ever had in France or the UK or anywhere. This was unbelievably good, and it's not that pricey. Definitely take the opportunity to visit this place if you're in Sibenik. Well, after passing a couple of times, it was actually time to get a proper look at this. This is the Baroque Cathedral of St James, and it's really quite something. We ended up sitting by the water for a bit, met Scooby-Doo, quick coffee. This place was pretty good. So after all of that killing time's out the way, let's try again. Okay, so this time we're on the bus to the Krka waterfalls. Let's talk about those. So this is a large national park up the Krka River. It's about 9 miles away from Sibenik, and while the national park contains a lot, including several clusters of waterfalls, the place that you've probably seen the pictures of is here, which for reference is the Skredinsky Book waterfalls. Now, because a lot of tourists don't necessarily come and stay in Sibenik, people get bussed in from all around. In fact, when we were in Split later, I probably saw, no exaggerations, about 20 different signs advertising a Krka trip, and this is from over 80 kilometres away. As it is, the public buses from Sibenik boil down to what seems like one bus there, one bus back. But look, hey, it's enough, and it's rock bottom cheap. Worked out something like a £5 each for a return ticket. That's compared to an average of 40 quid and up for an excursion. Granted, when you arrive, you do need to purchase entry to the national park, more on that in a second. So we got the bus to the small town of Skradin, where we would be getting a boat. This isn't something unique that we booked either. This is just the standard thing. You queue up in front of this ticket office, just a warning that these queues could get aggressively long in high season, but it wasn't too bad when we were there. You just wait and get on the next boat and off you go. And yes, you pass quite serenely under this bridge, which marks the entrance to the national park. This sounds like a weird thing to pick up on, but I was really appreciating how quiet the boat was. It meant that the cliffs, forests and reed beds went past and you didn't feel like you were intruding on everything and ruining it by being there. You could just enjoy the chorus of about 1 billion cicadas all talking at once. You eventually pull up alongside a jetty, follow the large snaking crowds, and there it is. My normal impulse is to shoot every landmark like this with all of the filthy humans neatly out of frame, but of course that's not really what's happening here. It's more like this. I mean, hey, considering all the volume of people that could be flocking here, this wasn't too bad. There was maybe 2 to 3 times the number of people on the banks surrounding. This selfie bridge was a bit of a crush, but hey, that figures. We did swim here, though I have no waterproofing on the camera, so that stayed stowed. Plus, you don't want to see me without a t-shirt on. The video and audio editing life does not leave much time to be a gym fanatic. It's a nice experience. You'll notice that line of buoys prevents anyone from going full Pocahontas and going right underneath the deluge. It's a pretty forceful torrent, so that's probably wise. Otherwise, it's a weird mixture of shallows, deepish water, and then suddenly like a stone that's barely an ankle deep. Now, I have to point out that, at least according to our host, this was in fact the last year that they were allowing swimming here. So, sorry? I mean, look, hey, it's not my call, but I guess I just feel bad that I'm telling you all about what it's like to swim there, and you're probably not going to be able to do that. But hey, I would have been no less happy to come and just view what is, let's face it, a gorgeous landmark. I don't know if you can still swim at Krovice in Bosnia. It's not far from Dubrovnik. That would probably be your next best bet if you really want to swim in front of some waterfalls. Then you queue up for a boat back, reverse the process, and you're back in Skradin, which is actually a really lovely little town. We had over an hour before our bus, so we just took a quick lap. Kind of strange, really, considering the footfall of thousands that were passing by to go to the waterfalls. Just a few yards in the town was as good as deserted. It's weird how the flow of tourists works. You can be one street away from hundreds of people and still barely having anyone coming to sit at your cafe. Most people that pass by here probably think that Skradin is nothing more than a ticket stand for the waterfalls, but I'm going to have to protest. It is a nice little town. It's got a fort that may or may not be Venetian. It was built between the 13th and 14th centuries, so you know it's got to be good. And look, there's this remarkably beautiful basilica church, and the streets are really beautiful. And look, someone's gone to the trouble of designing this logo for the town and had it cut out with CAD, and it's just been hidden behind this plant. So look, someone's got to fly the flag. Please consider this a very warm recommendation to take some time out in Skradin. Okay, I think we're wearing that joke out now. The bus pulled out of Skradin, past the most Yugoslavian thing we'd seen all holiday. I'm sure it needs some work to make it safe, but quick suggestion box here to Sibenik/Nin County. I think you're sitting on a tourist site here, guys. Don't fancy it up too much, but just enough so guided groups can get a look inside. I'd be well up for that. So, back to town, dinner from here, which I didn't film. After briefly dropping stuff at home and having a rest, we had one more stop for the day. This is St. Michael's Fortress, and we wanted to be there for sunset, and it was wonderful. Though, prepare to sweat getting up there. There's a lot of steps. There were beautiful views of everything, sunset to die for, amazing views of the town. The fort is now, in fact, as well as being a historical site, a concert venue. They were sound checking the whole time we were there, so it was kind of a racket actually, but the views were too gorgeous to care. And that was our last night in Sibenik. I spent that morning scampering around the old town. Croatia has done a really good job of highlighting their history. And yeah, there's plaques all around town, some fascinating details that have survived. And yes, I do occasionally forget that a lot of you watching do not care about the difference between a Gothic arch and a Romanesque arch, and cannot understand how I'd get so excited about this stuff. Well, even for you lot, you can just be soaking in the vibe. You don't need to be any sort of expert to appreciate the shady cool of the narrow medieval streets on a summer's afternoon with that trademark shiny stone floor that's been buffed by the passage of millions of feet over hundreds of years. We took one last pastry to savour the view from our apartment, an espresso here, which has a rather charming covered area with garden chairs and nozzles that waft a fine cool mist over you as you sit, which is hard to argue with. And that was pretty much bus o'clock, just 48 hours in Sibenik. So, a few final thoughts. Let's start with tips for navigating Sibenik. The old town is actually not that big. It's only a 10-minute walk wide in any direction, so just enjoy the notion of getting lost and you'll be fine. You won't starve. Once you get above the old town, you're going to be rolling D20 perception checks, and not even Google can help you here. But the key is, as far as you can, follow the roads. If there's cars, it's got to be connected to the road network somewhere, no matter how remotely. Once you commit to a staircase, no matter how prominent it might look, that is taking the nuclear option. You'll either get where you need to go, or have to about turn after 100 steps, rather red-faced from both embarrassment and exhaustion. Also, if it was not abundantly clear, do not attempt to bring a hire car into Sibenik. You will be crying. If you do have a hire car, park it far, far away and walk. Look, ignore me at your peril. There's barely space to get one car and a pedestrian down these lanes at the same time. In fact, they've inserted these bollards at intervals to try and reduce the anxiety for both parties. Seeing our host's son drive us through the side streets was one of the most impressive pieces of driving I have ever seen. He was accelerating up nearly 45-degree incline turns from stationary in a boxy Volvo with parked cars on either side of the corner and about the width of a mosquito's eyelash to spare. The city is pretty well served by bus routes, and look, the walking is a bit of a mish. If you have an actual mobility impairment, okay, that's a different matter, but otherwise, look, please grow up. If you have 3-wheeled suitcases to drag, that's your own fault for packing like the Sultan of Brunei. Next time, get over yourself and cram it into a single backpack. Otherwise, if you're a grown adult, you can walk 15 to 20 minutes, stop whining. In spite of the above, I adored our view. Again, I've left a link in the description for this Airbnb. It's near the top of the slope, and just sitting taking the views made my year. Plus, Anita, the host, was brilliant. Sibenik does have a beach. We didn't actually get there in the end. It's maybe 20 minutes walk away. Okay, so Zadar was beautiful, but Sibenik was really, really special. Beautiful streets, good coffee, crazy good croissants, waterfalls, and the views. Look, make sure and get some accommodation with a view, and make a point of visiting Sibenik if you can. So we'll be continuing our journey down the Croatian Adriatic next episode. Meanwhile, if you've been enjoying the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can find it all on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. Please also give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram, and hit all of the YouTube buttons. That would massively help us out. Otherwise, have a great one, and we'll see you on the next one.